If no wolf will take your hand, perhaps destiny has been waiting for someone greater. The words echoed only inside Evelyn Harper's heart as she stood alone beneath the silver banners of the winter mating ceremony, surrounded by thousands of wolves who had gathered from every corner of the kingdom. The cold mountain air carried the scent of pine, fresh snow, and blooming moon lilies, but none of it could soften the weight pressing against her chest. She kept her hands folded neatly before her simple ivory dress, refusing to let anyone see them tremble. Every unmarried Omega had dreamed of standing in this sacred circle one day, believing fate would guide the right mate forward beneath the full moon. Evelyn had once believed it too. Years ago, before whispers became cruel laughter, before every child in her village learned to avoid her shadow, she had imagined someone smiling at her instead of looking away. Those dreams had disappeared one quiet disappointment at a time. The elders called her unfortunate. Some claimed the moon goddess had forgotten her. Others insisted she carried a silent curse because her wolf had never awakened. Whether the stories were true no longer mattered. What mattered was the simple fact that no wolf wished to choose her. Around the great stone plaza, young alphas proudly stepped toward beautiful omegas while joyful families applauded each new match. Warm embraces, grateful tears, and hopeful laughter filled the air as one destiny after another unfolded beneath the brilliant moonlight. Evelyn watched with a gentle smile she had practiced for years, one convincing enough to hide the loneliness that had quietly become part of her life. She sincerely wished happiness for every couple, even while knowing no one would ever celebrate her. When her name was finally announced, silence drifted across the gathering. She walked into the center of the ceremonial circle with quiet grace, her pale blonde hair moving softly in the winter breeze. The elders waited. The crowd waited. The moon itself seemed to wait. One by one, every eligible wolf simply remained where they stood. Some lowered their eyes. Others turned away as though pretending not to hear. A few exchanged awkward glances before choosing another direction entirely. No insults were spoken aloud because none were necessary. Their silence said everything. Evelyn bowed her head politely, determined to leave with the same dignity she had carried into the ceremony. She had almost taken her first step away when an unfamiliar sound drifted through the frozen courtyard. It was neither applause nor laughter. It was the slow, steady rhythm of approaching footsteps. Every conversation stopped. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. From beyond the towering stone gates emerged a solitary traveler wrapped in a long black cloak dusted with snow from distant mountains. His hood concealed most of his face, yet his calm presence carried an unshakable confidence unlike anything the crowd had ever felt. He walked without hesitation through the rows of startled wolves until he stood directly before Evelyn. She slowly lifted her eyes, meeting the gaze of a stranger whose silver-gray eyes reflected the moon itself. Without asking permission, without speaking a single unnecessary word, the mysterious man gently reached forward and took her trembling hand into his own. The warmth of the stranger's hand silenced every whisper in the courtyard more effectively than any royal command ever could. Evelyn stood frozen, unable to understand why a man she had never seen before was looking at her as though she were the only person standing beneath the moon. The elder overseeing the ceremony blinked several times before clearing his throat. "Do you understand what you are choosing?" he asked carefully. The cloaked traveler answered with a calm voice that carried surprising authority despite its gentle tone. "I do. Nothing more. No explanation. No apology. No hesitation." The elder slowly nodded and completed the ancient blessing while countless wolves watched in stunned disbelief. As tradition required, the newly joined couple exchanged simple silver bands forged from moonstone steel. Evelyn's fingers trembled as the cool ring settled into place. She had imagined this moment so many times during her childhood, but never like this. She had expected pity if anyone ever chose her. Instead, the mysterious stranger looked at her with quiet respect, as though accepting her hand had been the easiest decision of his life. Around them, the silence gradually gave way to hushed conversations. Some believed the traveler must be desperate. Others assumed he had mistaken her for someone else. A few whispered that he was probably in exile with nowhere else to go. None of the theories seemed to bother him. Once the ceremony ended, he simply offered Evelyn his arm. She accepted after only a brief hesitation, and together they walked away from the great plaza while hundreds of curious eyes followed every step. Outside the village gates, a modest carriage waited beneath towering pine trees. There were no royal emblems, no luxurious decorations, only sturdy craftsmanship built for long journeys across difficult mountain roads. The traveler helped Evelyn inside before taking the seat opposite her. For several peaceful miles, only the sound of wooden wheels rolling over frozen ground filled the quiet space between them. Finally Evelyn gathered enough courage to speak. "May I know your name?" she asked softly. The man smiled with surprising warmth. "Kieran." He offered only his first name, and somehow that seemed perfectly natural. "Thank you," she whispered after another moment passed. He tilted his head slightly. "For what?" She lowered her eyes toward the silver ring now resting on her finger. "For seeing someone worth choosing." Kieran remained silent for several heartbeats before answering. "I did not choose you because no one else would. I chose you because I have spent a long time looking for someone exactly like you." His words settled gently inside her heart, carrying a quiet sincerity that felt impossible to question. As twilight painted the snowy mountains in shades of blue and silver, the carriage climbed toward a secluded valley hidden among ancient forests. A small stone cottage overlooked a peaceful lake that reflected the evening sky like polished glass. It was simple, warm, and welcoming, nothing like the grand estates owned by powerful alphas. Kieran stepped down first, then offered his hand once again. Evelyn accepted it. Instinctively this time. Standing beside him before their new home, she noticed something curious. Several passing travelers stopped along the distant road, lowered their heads respectfully toward Kieran, then continued on without saying a single word. He acknowledged each greeting with only a slight nod, never explaining why complete strangers treated an ordinary traveler with such quiet reverence. Evelyn watched the scene with growing curiosity, unaware that the greatest secret in the kingdom had just welcomed her home. Morning sunlight spilled gently across the quiet valley as Evelyn slowly settled into a life she had never imagined possible. The small stone cottage was simple, yet every corner carried a sense of peace that felt unfamiliar after years of living where every glance had reminded her she did not belong. She rose early each morning before the mist lifted from the lake, preparing fresh bread, gathering herbs from the hillside, and filling the cottage with the comforting scent of warm tea. Kieran often left before sunrise, saying only that nearby villages sometimes needed help repairing fences, delivering supplies, or assisting travelers crossing the mountain passes. He never spoke at length about where he went, yet he always returned before nightfall carrying fresh firewood or simple groceries, greeting Evelyn with the same calm smile that slowly replaced the uncertainty she still carried inside her heart. Days passed quietly, and for the first time in many years Evelyn found herself smiling without forcing it. The forest surrounding the cottage became her companion. She learned where wildflowers bloomed even in cool weather, where clear streams flowed beneath ancient stone bridges, and where injured birds often rested after storms. Whenever she discovered an animal in need, she patiently cared for it until it was strong enough to return to the woods. Word quietly spread among nearby families that the gentle young woman living beside the lake always welcomed anyone seeking herbs, warm soup, or a listening ear. Elderly neighbors occasionally stopped by carrying homemade pies or baskets of apples, thanking her for helping their children or comforting lonely widows. Evelyn accepted every gift with humble gratitude, never realizing how unusual such kindness appeared to those who had spent years expecting nothing from strangers. Kieran watched these moments more often than she noticed. Sometimes he would pause outside before entering the cottage, seeing her laugh with neighborhood children while teaching them how to braid flower crowns or listening patiently as an old farmer spoke about memories of his late wife. There was never pride in her kindness. She simply helped because helping felt natural. One quiet evening, while they shared a modest dinner beside the fireplace, Evelyn finally asked the question that had lingered in her thoughts since arriving. "Why did you truly choose me?" she asked softly. Kieran looked into the dancing fire for a long moment before answering. "Because I wanted someone whose heart remained gentle even after the world gave it every reason to become cold." His voice carried no dramatic emotion, only quiet certainty. Evelyn lowered her eyes, unsure how to respond to words she had never expected anyone would say to her. Outside, snow began falling gently across the valley, covering the earth in fresh white silence. As they finished their meal, a firm knock echoed at the cottage door. Kieran rose calmly and opened it. Standing outside were three well-dressed travelers wearing heavy winter cloaks. The moment they saw him, each respectfully lowered his head before speaking in careful voices too quiet for Evelyn to hear. Kieran stepped outside with them for only a few minutes. When he returned, his expression remained composed, but something thoughtful lingered behind his silver-gray eyes. He quietly placed a small silver pendant shaped like a wolf upon the wooden table before removing his gloves. Evelyn noticed the intricate symbol engraved into its surface, identical to the crest carved above the entrance of the largest royal temple she had once seen as a child. Before she could ask where it had come from, Kieran gently covered it with his hand and smiled as though nothing unusual had happened, while outside the falling snow continued to hide secrets the mountain was not yet ready to reveal. Winter gradually surrendered to the first signs of spring, and the quiet valley became filled with fresh blossoms, clear streams, and the cheerful voices of neighbors who had come to trust the gentle woman living beside the lake. Evelyn no longer counted the days since the ceremony because life itself had become something she quietly treasured. Every morning she prepared breakfast while Kieran stacked fresh firewood beside the cottage, and every evening they shared simple meals while watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and crimson. Their conversations remained gentle and unhurried. Kieran never spoke much about himself, yet he always listened whenever Evelyn shared memories of her childhood or laughed about the small adventures she experienced while gathering herbs in the forest. She had begun to realize that silence did not always mean loneliness. Sometimes silence simply meant peace. One afternoon several children from a nearby village arrived carrying baskets of wildflowers for Evelyn. They happily thanked her for helping one of their grandmothers recover from a long illness with nothing more than patience, warm soup, and carefully prepared herbal remedies. Kieran watched quietly from the garden as the children surrounded Evelyn with innocent admiration. His eyes softened with quiet satisfaction before he returned to repairing an old wooden fence without interrupting the joyful moment. After the children left, Evelyn noticed another traveler approaching along the narrow mountain road. Unlike the friendly villagers, this visitor wore an elegant cloak embroidered with silver thread and carried himself with the posture of someone accustomed to authority. As soon as he reached the cottage gate, he respectfully lowered his head toward Kieran. "Everything is prepared," the visitor said carefully. "They continue asking for your return." Kieran answered in the same calm voice he always used. "Not yet." The visitor appeared disappointed but accepted the response immediately. "As you wish." Before leaving, he briefly glanced toward Evelyn with visible curiosity before bowing politely to her as well. After he disappeared into the forest, Evelyn turned toward her husband with a thoughtful smile. "You seem to know many important people." Kieran smiled gently while continuing his work. "Sometimes old responsibilities have long memories." His answer sounded honest without revealing anything at all. Days later, the peaceful rhythm of their lives shifted unexpectedly when several familiar faces appeared at the edge of the valley. Evelyn immediately recognized members of her former pack. The same people who had ignored her during the ceremony now stood outside the cottage pretending to be friendly while exchanging amused glances at the modest home she shared with her mysterious husband. Their greetings sounded polite, yet every smile carried the quiet sting of old judgment. One woman looked at the weathered stone walls before saying, "I suppose this is better than being alone." Another added with a soft laugh, "At least someone finally accepted you." Evelyn remained gracious, offering warm tea despite every painful memory their voices awakened. Kieran stood nearby listening without interruption, his expression impossible to read. He neither defended her nor challenged the visitors. Instead, he calmly invited everyone inside as though they were honored guests. The former pack members accepted, completely unaware that every careless word spoken beneath that humble roof was quietly bringing them closer to a truth capable of changing everything they believed about the forgotten Omega they had once dismissed. The visitors remained at the cottage far longer than courtesy required, filling the cozy room with pleasant smiles that never quite reached their eyes. Evelyn welcomed each of them with warm bread, fresh herbal tea, and the same kindness she offered every guest, refusing to let old memories change the person she had become. They thanked her politely, yet their conversation slowly drifted toward familiar wounds. One older wolf glanced around the modest cottage before sighing dramatically. "It is a quiet life, but I suppose quiet is better than being forgotten." Another woman smiled as though offering comfort. "We always wondered what became of you after the ceremony. We assumed your husband would eventually realize what everyone else already knew." A few soft chuckles followed around the table. Evelyn lowered her eyes for only a moment before calmly refilling their cups. She had spent too many years carrying the weight of cruel opinions to allow them to steal the peace she had finally found. Kieran sat beside the fireplace, silently listening while carving a small wooden bird with careful, steady hands. His expression remained relaxed, making it impossible to guess what he was thinking. Encouraged by his silence, the visitors became increasingly comfortable. One man leaned back in his chair and laughed lightly. "Tell us honestly, traveler. Did you marry her out of pity?" Another added, "No offense, but there must have been prettier Omegas in every neighboring village." Evelyn immediately shook her head, hoping to prevent embarrassment before it grew any worse. "Please," she said gently. "There is no need to speak this way." But Kieran finally placed the unfinished carving on the table and looked toward their guests with the same calm expression he always carried. "May I ask each of you a question?" he said politely. The room grew unexpectedly quiet. Everyone nodded. "Before today," he continued, "how many of you visited Evelyn when she lived alone?" No one answered. His voice remained warm rather than accusing. "How many offered friendship when others turned away?" Silence settled over the table. Several visitors exchanged uneasy glances. Kieran continued without raising his voice. "How many accepted the bread she baked, the herbs she gathered, or the kindness she freely offered before you believed someone else valued her?" One by one, their confident smiles faded. Evelyn looked toward her husband with quiet surprise. There was no anger in his words, only simple questions whose answers everyone already knew. The oldest visitor cleared his throat awkwardly. "Perhaps, we judged too quickly." Kieran nodded thoughtfully. "That happens more often than people realize." Before anyone could respond again, the peaceful afternoon was interrupted by the distant sound of horses approaching along the mountain road. Unlike ordinary travelers, these riders moved with remarkable precision. Moments later, 6 mounted guards dressed in elegant silver cloaks stopped before the cottage gate. Each rider dismounted at the exact same moment. Their polished armor carried the same wolf crest Evelyn had noticed on the silver pendant hidden inside the cottage. Without hesitation, all 6 guards lowered themselves onto one knee facing Kieran. Their captain bowed his head respectfully before speaking in a voice clear enough for everyone to hear. "Your Majesty, the Royal Council requests your immediate return. The kingdom awaits its Alpha King." Every face inside the cottage turned toward the quiet man they believed was nothing more than an ordinary traveler, while Evelyn stood frozen beside the table, suddenly understanding that the greatest mystery of her new life had only just begun. For several endless seconds, no one inside the cottage moved. The words spoken by the captain seemed impossible to belong to the quiet man who had spent months repairing fences, carrying firewood, and sharing simple meals beside the lake. Evelyn slowly turned toward Kieran, searching his calm face for some sign that this had all been a misunderstanding. Instead, he gently released a quiet breath and stepped outside. The 6 royal guards remained kneeling with their heads lowered, waiting patiently until he acknowledged them with a slight nod. "Rise," he said softly. They obeyed immediately without hesitation. The former members of Evelyn's pack stared in stunned silence, their confident expressions replaced by disbelief. The man who had joked about pity moments earlier suddenly looked unable to meet Kieran's eyes. The women who had whispered that Evelyn should be grateful for any husband at all stood motionless, realizing every careless word had been spoken before the ruler of the entire kingdom. Kieran turned back toward the open cottage door where Evelyn still stood holding the untouched teapot in trembling hands. He walked to her slowly, his expression unchanged, gentle, patient, and filled with quiet understanding. "I wanted to tell you sooner," he said, "but I wanted you to know me before you knew my crown." Evelyn searched his silver-gray eyes, remembering every simple morning beside the lake, every evening by the fireplace, every quiet smile, every kind gesture that had never asked for admiration. Nothing about the man she had come to trust had changed. Only the truth surrounding him had. "You are, the Alpha King," she whispered. He smiled softly. "I have always been Kieran with you." A single tear escaped before Evelyn quickly brushed it away. It was not fear that filled her heart. It was the overwhelming realization that the man who ruled countless wolves had chosen to live quietly beside someone the world had considered unworthy. One of the visitors finally stepped forward, lowering his head deeply. "Your Majesty, we did not know." Kieran looked at him without anger. "No," he replied calmly. "You only knew what you chose to see." His words were spoken gently, yet every listener felt their truth. Another visitor quietly apologized to Evelyn, followed by another, until every former critic stood with lowered eyes, ashamed not because they had offended their king, but because they had failed someone whose kindness had never depended on how she was treated. Kieran reached for Evelyn's hand exactly as he had beneath the moon on the day they met. "There is one journey left," he said. Together they stepped toward the waiting horses as the royal guards respectfully formed around them. The ride to the capital took them through villages that lined the roads with smiling families, blooming spring flowers, and waving children. Everywhere they passed, people respectfully bowed, not only to their king but also to the woman riding beside him. As the magnificent palace finally appeared beyond towering silver gates, thousands of citizens gathered across the grand courtyard. The royal council waited at the top of the marble staircase while banners bearing the ancient wolf crest fluttered beneath the afternoon sky. Kieran guided Evelyn forward until they stood before the entire kingdom. Then, without ceremony or hesitation, the Alpha King lifted her hand for everyone to see and spoke with calm certainty. "This woman was never chosen because she married a king. I married her because she possesses the rarest strength any kingdom can hope to find. Today I ask every wolf gathered here to honor your future Luna, not for her title, but for the heart that earned it long before any crown ever could." The grand courtyard remained completely silent after Kieran's words echoed across the palace grounds. Thousands of wolves stood beneath fluttering silver banners, their attention fixed not upon the Alpha King they had always admired, but upon the quiet woman standing beside him with humble uncertainty in her eyes. Evelyn had never imagined herself surrounded by marble towers, royal advisors, or noble families dressed in elegant ceremonial robes. Only months earlier she had been the forgotten Omega no one had wished to claim. Now every gaze in the kingdom rested upon her, and the weight of that attention felt almost impossible to carry. Kieran sensed the hesitation in her gentle grip and gave her hand a reassuring squeeze before leading her toward the palace entrance. Along the wide marble staircase, rows of royal guards respectfully lowered their heads as the couple passed. None of them hesitated. None questioned their king's choice. Their unwavering respect quietly reminded everyone watching that true authority began by honoring the decision of a leader they trusted completely. Inside the palace, sunlight streamed through towering stained glass windows, filling the great hall with warm colors that danced across polished stone floors. Members of the royal council gathered near the throne, each bowing respectfully as Kieran entered. Their eldest advisor stepped forward with a welcoming smile. "Your Majesty, the kingdom rejoices at your return." Then he turned toward Evelyn and lowered his head with equal respect. "Your Majesty, welcome home." Evelyn instinctively looked behind her, almost believing he must have been speaking to someone else. Kieran noticed her confusion and quietly smiled. "He means you." She took a slow breath, still struggling to believe the life unfolding before her eyes. During the days that followed, palace servants kindly offered to teach Evelyn every royal custom expected of a Luna queen. She listened carefully, thanked everyone sincerely, and learned each tradition with the same patience she had once used while gathering herbs beside the quiet lake. Yet despite the luxury surrounding her, she never forgot the simple habits that had shaped her heart. She greeted every servant by name, carried her own books whenever possible, and often visited the palace kitchen simply to thank the cooks preparing meals for hundreds of people each day. At first the staff found her kindness surprising. Soon they found it inspiring. News of the new queen's gentle spirit spread through every hallway until even the youngest stable workers spoke about her with quiet admiration. One afternoon, several noble ladies requested permission to meet the woman their king had chosen. Some arrived out of genuine curiosity, while others secretly expected to find someone awkward and unworthy of the crown. Instead they discovered Evelyn kneeling beside the palace gardens, patiently helping a frightened young servant rescue a small bird whose wing had become tangled among flowering vines. She smiled warmly after the tiny creature safely fluttered back into the sky, completely unaware that every noblewoman had witnessed the simple act. None of them saw a woman pretending to be kind. They saw someone whose compassion appeared as naturally as breathing. Later that evening, one of the older noblewomen approached Kieran privately. "Your Majesty," she said with quiet respect, "today I finally understand why you searched so long before choosing your queen." Kieran looked through the palace window where Evelyn stood laughing gently with palace children as they planted fresh spring flowers together. A peaceful smile crossed his face. "Many believed they were judging her worth," he answered softly. "In truth, they were only revealing their own." Weeks passed, and the palace gradually transformed in ways few people had expected. It was not because new laws were announced or grand celebrations filled the capital. The change began with countless small acts that reflected the heart of the new Luna. Evelyn asked that the palace gardens remain open one afternoon each week so children from nearby villages could visit and learn about the healing herbs she had once gathered beside the quiet mountain lake. She invited elderly widows to share meals in the royal dining hall instead of eating alone, and she encouraged palace cooks to prepare extra bread each morning for travelers arriving after long journeys. None of these gestures were required by tradition, yet they quickly became beloved customs throughout the kingdom. The people noticed that their queen never walked past anyone without offering a warm greeting, whether speaking to royal advisors or stable workers. She remembered names, listened carefully, and thanked others before accepting their gratitude. Stories of her kindness spread far beyond the capital until even distant villages spoke about the gentle Luna whose greatest strength was making every person feel seen. One bright spring morning, representatives from Evelyn's former pack arrived at the palace carrying carefully wrapped gifts and formal letters of respect. Their leader bowed deeply before the royal couple, his voice noticeably humbler than it had been during the ceremony months earlier. "Your Majesties," he said sincerely, "we have come to offer our congratulations and to ask forgiveness for the way we treated Lady Evelyn before we understood her worth." Evelyn quietly looked toward Kieran before stepping forward herself. The memories remained clear in her heart, yet so did the peace she had found after leaving them behind. She accepted the gifts with gracious appreciation before gently returning the letters unopened. "Kindness loses its meaning if it is only offered after someone gains power," she said softly. "But forgiveness becomes stronger when it is given without asking for anything in return. I hope all of us will remember that from this day forward." The visitors lowered their heads, deeply moved by words they knew they had not earned. As they prepared to leave, Evelyn asked the palace staff to provide each family with baskets of fresh food and medicinal herbs for the journey home. The former pack members departed carrying far more than supplies. They carried a lesson that would remain with them for years. Later that evening, while the palace balconies overlooked a sky filled with countless Stars, Kieran and Evelyn stood together in peaceful silence. The cool breeze carried the familiar scent of pine forests from the distant mountains where their quiet cottage still waited beside the lake. "Do you ever miss our little home?" Kieran asked with a gentle smile. Evelyn rested her hands upon the stone railing and looked toward the moon rising above the kingdom. "Every day," she admitted with a soft laugh. "But home was never only the cottage. Home was wherever we chose to be together." Kieran smiled with quiet contentment, realizing that nothing about the woman he had married had changed despite the crown she now wore. She remained the same compassionate soul who had offered kindness without expecting recognition, proving once again that destiny had not transformed Evelyn into a queen. It had simply revealed the queen she had always been. As another spring gave way to summer, the kingdom no longer spoke about the mysterious marriage that had once surprised every pack across the land. Instead, people spoke about the quiet peace that had settled over villages, forests, and mountain roads. Travelers often said they could recognize they had entered the Alpha King's territory long before reaching the capital because strangers greeted one another with greater kindness, children laughed more freely in the village squares, and those who had little rarely remained alone for long. Many believed those changes began with new royal policies, but those who knew the palace best understood a different truth. They began with the gentle example of a queen who treated every life with equal dignity. One bright morning, Kieran suggested they revisit the secluded valley where their journey together had truly begun. Without royal processions or formal ceremonies, they quietly rode through familiar mountain trails until the peaceful lake appeared once again between the towering pines. The little stone cottage remained exactly as they had left it. Wildflowers surrounded the porch, birds nested beneath the roof, and the old wooden fence Kieran had repaired months before still stood strong against the passing seasons. Evelyn stepped inside and smiled as though no time had passed at all. The simple wooden table remained beside the window. The fireplace still carried the comforting scent of cedar. The shelves where she had once stored healing herbs stood neatly arranged, waiting as though they had known she would someday return. Kieran watched her quietly, grateful that neither crowns nor grand halls had changed the woman standing before him. She was still the same Evelyn who found happiness in ordinary moments, the same woman who believed kindness did not require witnesses, and the same soul whose quiet strength had restored hope to a king long before she ever knew his name. They spent the afternoon walking beside the lake where their earliest conversations had slowly transformed strangers into trusted companions. As the sun began to sink beyond the mountains, Evelyn noticed a young girl standing nearby with a basket of freshly picked flowers. The child hesitated before approaching. "Are you really the Luna Queen?" she asked shyly. Evelyn smiled warmly and knelt until they stood at the same height. "Yes," she answered gently. The little girl looked down at her worn shoes before speaking again. "Sometimes people laugh because I am different." Evelyn carefully tucked one of the wildflowers behind the child's ear. "Never let someone else's opinion decide your worth," she said softly. "The right people will see your heart before they notice anything else." The little girl smiled with growing confidence before running back toward her family. Kieran watched the exchange with quiet admiration because he knew those simple words would remain with the child far longer than any royal speech. As evening settled across the valley, the first stars appeared above the peaceful lake where everything had begun. Kieran reached for Evelyn's hand just as he had beneath the moon on the day every other wolf had turned away. She smiled, her fingers naturally finding his. Together they stood in comfortable silence, watching the reflection of the stars shimmer across the water. Long before destiny had revealed a hidden king, it had quietly revealed something even more extraordinary. The greatest crown was never worn upon a head. It was carried within a heart that chose compassion over pride, forgiveness over resentment, and love over judgment, proving that the one no wolf was willing to touch became the woman an entire kingdom would forever be honored to call its queen.